Welcome to Dram Talk, your new mates on your journey into the world of whiskey. I'm Brad.
And I'm Daniel, and today we'll be looking at the Laphroaig 10 and the Ardbeg 10. And we'll also be discussing peated whiskey.
Yeah, so Daniel, it's been a while, and I don't know if the audience can tell, but this is another remote recording. And Daniel, why is that?
Well, it's especially different for remote recording because it's actually an interstate remote recording. So I'm currently down in Canberra working. So chances are we may have some slight delay due to the internet connection here.
Yeah, you definitely would have heard the choppiness there. So if you didn't catch it, Daniel has left the awesome state of New South Wales to go to the ACT. So I mean, we can't just stop the pod. We have to keep going, right? And
yeah, there's always room for whiskey.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it just gives me an excuse to head down to the ACT now.
Yeah, I mean, like this, it's a whole new world. I've got new whiskey bars to try out, new whiskey friends to meet.
Yeah. So guys, probably stay tuned for the next podcast. Daniel will probably start another one when he meets a new whiskey friend down in Canberra.
Yeah, no comment there.
You've probably already made plans and you're already getting ready to start your new pod.
But I can only offer you another 20 minutes, Brad. I'm gonna have to run to the next group on its tight schedule now.
And I mean, before we head into the first whiskey today, which is Laphroaig 10, and I mean, it's almost blasphemy that it's taken us this long to get to it, or whenever you're hearing this, but last weekend for us, I went down to Canberra, and Daniel and I managed to try some Laphroaig gelato.
Yes, that was really interesting. It's, I guess, chocolate company called Jasper and Myrtle. They made Laphroaig gelato, which, you might think is really strange and random. We certainly did, but it was something that was so interesting and unique that we just thought, we've got to go and find this. We've got to try it. So yeah, we tracked down their shop and we were having a chat with the owners, and yeah, like they love, well, he loves whiskey, and especially Irish whiskey, but they were saying like they were looking for whiskey that gave like the right kind of kick or additional flavor to their gelato, and they settled for Laphroaig, both for its character as well as its price point. And let me tell you, that gelato, it shocked us both how much it resembled Laphroaig.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I had no real way to feel or preconception of what a whiskey gelato would taste like or should taste like. So going into it and getting that experience.
Whiskey gelato.
Yeah, exactly. Like a peated one as well. So going into it and then getting what we experienced with that first spoonful was just incredible.
Yeah, it blew us out of the park. Like I got 2 tubs. I had to get 2.
And I only got the one tub just for the fear of it turning into mush on the drive back. I was panicking driving home, thinking, oh God, how am I going to maintain the viability of this precious, precious gelato?
Yeah, and I don't think that would have worked for any kind of RBTs. They pulled you over to do a breath test. You're like, I swear it's just the gelato.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So, I mean, if you're in Australia and you ever head down to the ACT, head down to Jasper and Myrtle, and if they have the Laphroaig gelato in stock, do yourself a favor and get a tub. It will blow your socks off.
Yeah, and the chocolate is really good too.
Yeah, the chocolate's really good too. I mean, but this is a whiskey podcast, Daniel, so let's just keep promoting that Laphroaig gelato.
Stick to the whiskey.
But the chocolate is good. So yeah, let's
that gelato, man.
Yeah, that gelato. But moving away from gelato now, but we'll keep along the same theme of Laphroaig 10. So Laphroaig, they're a distillery. They've been running for over 200 years. So I mean, of course, within that time frame, there's sure to be a few notable events. And if we just sat here...
Yeah, like 1 or 2.
Yeah. So if we just sat here and did a breakdown of the history, that's probably going to be the whole episode, right? And we got another dram to get to. So here's just my pick of the lot.
Lightning around it.
So Laphroaig originally started 1815, two brothers leasing 1,000 acres or so of land, and they were farmers originally. They had an overproduction of barley, and instead of, what would you do? An overproduction of barley. What else to do than make whiskey, right?
You certainly wouldn't eat it.
No, of course. So you'd make whiskey, right? Then, of course, one of the brothers decided to emigrate, go to Australia.
Good
and
choice.
Then, yeah, good choice. And then in 1847, Donald, the brother that remained behind to run the distillery, he died in an accident after falling into a vat of partially made whiskey.
I mean, like, that really sucks. But at the same time, I get it.
Yeah, I get it. I'd probably do the same thing. So,
that'd probably be a way to go.
Yeah. And another notable note in their history, at a point in time, tensions with Lagavulin rose. So they were both owned by Mackey & Co., conglomerate at the time, and they owned a large portion of distilleries, and they were looking to make blends. And as Laphroaig were more interested in producing their single malt, that agreement soon fell apart, and Laphroaig were accused of acting illegally by Mackey & Co., but Mackey & Co. lost this battle at tribunal. But in retaliation, as the tensions and the rivalry was getting a little heated between Lagavulin and Laphroaig, Lagavulin followed this by diverting their precious water source, the Kilbride stream, with stone blocks. So without their precious water, Laphroaig's whiskey production was crippled. Then only after another court case would Peter Mackey, Lagavulin's manager at the time, he was ordered to restore the water supply. So I'm just imagining him having to go and just remove those rocks that they used to block the water supply.
You got like the judge and the manager of Laphroaig just standing there, like tutting, watching Peter Mackey just lift up these rocks. Like, I hope you learnt your lesson.
Right. And however, though, this feud still persisted, with Mackey then hiring Laphroaig's distiller. So with his help, Lagavulin built a new distillery that was identical to Laphroaig, that was named Malt Mill. So they were just trying to replicate the great whiskey that is Laphroaig. However, despite their best efforts, they just weren't able to do that. Then by 1921, Ian Hunter had taken over the distillery, and under Hunter's leadership, Laphroaig flourished and became widely popular. But at that time, with Prohibition in full swing, Hunter had managed to successfully find a loophole in order to bypass US customs, and Laphroaig was able to be sold for medicinal purposes. And, again,
I buy it for medicinal purposes.
And again, I get it.
Yep.
I get it. I just get it. That just resonates with me. I don't know why, but it does. And
yeah, it really does.
If anything, I think, which may be one of the biggest, footnotes in their history, would be, in 1954, Bessie Williamson taking over. And this is just a landmark moment in whiskey history in general, as few women had been in charge of distilleries before her. Then the company's royal warrant of appointment to the Prince of Wales happened in 1994. So if you don't know, Prince Charles, the late Prince Charles, loved Laphroaig. Then in 1994, the distillery launched a new community named the Friends of Laphroaig, which now has nearly 500,000 members, probably more, but
500,001 and 500,002, I think.
But enclosed in every tube of Laphroaig is a small leaflet with a unique code that can be used when signing up online, and it's free. Friends of Laphroaig is a unique concept which rewards the community there with a number of perks, but it also provides another benefit to the distillery itself. So the land owned by members surrounds the Kilbride stream. So as such, the ownership is further protected and secured, as any changes to that surrounding land would require the signatures of the Friends of Laphroaig.
Yeah, that's a lot of signatures you got to get.
Yeah, that's just not worth the time and effort, hey?
Not worth the effort, no.
So, let's just hope Lagavulin and Laphroaig are on good terms now. No more rocks in the
I
stream.
mean, they're both great whiskies in their own right. So hopefully they've got their markets
Yeah.
and they can both keep operating and providing us with them.
Yeah. So I mean, those were just, I guess, my pick of the lot of the, I guess, great footnotes in Laphroaig's history. So I mean, if you've got the time, go out and read it because there's some good stuff in there, and it's a long history as well.
Yeah, it makes for eventful reading.
But now let's get on to the wonderful spirit itself.
Ah, yes. I've been waiting so long to get back into this one. Like, I think both of us, our bottles are getting quite close to the bottom. So we've just been really conservative with our pours of Laphroaig. And I know I haven't had one in a while, just because we've been waiting to get it done on the pod.
Yeah, it's been ages for me as well. So I've just kind of had my bottle of Laphroaig at the very back of the cabinet just to avoid the temptation and just remove it from my mind. Just, Brad, you do not have a bottle of Laphroaig 10. So it's just to make sure that I had some for the pod episode when we eventually did get to it. And as I said before, it's almost a crime that it's taken this long for us to get to Laphroaig. Especially,
Yeah, it really is.
and especially
But
considering when we purchased these bottles, how quickly Daniel and I both were just smashing it.
yeah, I was disappearing so fast. I pick it up, the bottle up, and I'm like, who's been drinking my Laphroaig? Because I swear there was more in here.
Yeah, yeah. I had the same issue. Like I remember after we'd purchased the bottle and maybe like 2 or 3 weeks, we were talking about it and we were saying like, what have you been drinking? And I was just saying, oh, Daniel, you know, I've only been having Laphroaig the past couple of weeks. And you're like, same. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So, and that's kind of when you know that it's a great whiskey. It's just something that
keep coming back to.
just keep coming back to it.
Yeah, so it is a tragedy when the bottle gets low, but yeah, as you said, you know that's when you've got a good whiskey. It's like you just can't stop drinking it. You can't help yourself.
Yeah, and right now I can't help myself. Let's get onto the nose.
Let's do it.
Initially, when I hit the nose of Laphroaig, I get a little bit of saltiness, but it's not overly present like what you'd commonly find in some of the more coastal Islay whiskies. There are some hints of spice, but I think the main thing that sticks out to me is the medicinal character. So definitely that iodine.
Yeah, like knocked it out of the park there. You've pretty much stolen most of the notes because I think that iodine peat is what really comes across. And I mean, like, you'd see if you open the bottle and you're like, oh, this is medicine, and someone smelled it, they're like, you know what, you're probably right. It probably is medicine.
I mean, so again, I get it. You know, like if I've got a cold, just give me a little bit of Laphroaig and I think I'll be all right. It's just got all the properties I need to whatever ails you.
Yeah, and I think like the crossover between the iodine medicinal notes and the saltiness comes across in almost like a pleasant chlorine kind of note, like a really subtle chlorine note.
Yeah, it's really weird for me because when you kind of put those notes together in your mind, you don't really associate it with a dram that could particularly be moorish or maybe even smooth or comforting. But then that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah, exactly. And like when it comes to the peat, like I know we said it's very iodine-y, but there's also some kind of vegetal earthy note in there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me that earthy nature kind of underlies everything and just gives it a nice base that it builds on. Going on to the palate now. And now for me, what I love about this palate is I even start to get notes of chili, maybe even black pepper at the front. Then as it kind of makes its way across your palate, you get some notes. You still get some of those medicinal notes. You even get like a smoky oak feeling within your mouth. And as it continues to grow and as it's finishing, I'm almost getting a bit of a vanilla ice cream as well.
I was going to say, like, I was getting that more like closer towards the front. So I was getting kind of a mixture of, and it's weird. It's like one of the things, like, as I'm piecing it together in my head, I'm picking out the notes. I'm like, these don't sound like they should go together because it is a little bit salty, but almost like a or even savory, like more of an umami kind of flavor, like the same
Right.
thing you get with, like, I want to say kind of borderline seaweed. Um, yeah, like, yeah, green vegetal, salty notes. But then there is like a really nice, creamy vanilla style smoothness that, as you said, it's like vanilla ice cream. And I'm like, you know what? I would, going back to the Laphroaig gelato, I'm like, you know what? I can see how, upon reflection, tasting this dram, how an ice cream made out of Laphroaig would actually work.
Oh yeah, 100%. And when I get those notes of chili and black pepper as well, they're actually really pleasant. Whereas when you get that
Mm.
chili note in a Talisker, it's a bit more bitey
Yeah.
and a bit more aggressive.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah, and
yeah, as you
whereas this
said,
presentation
it's
of chili,
balanced here.
yeah, this presentation of chili just super balanced and just it kind of just dances across your tongue as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to attacking your taste buds.
Yeah, and then I'm starting to pick those out on the nose again, following having tasted them.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about the finish as well, huge, but at the same time,
Yeah.
super dry. So, and then that
Mm-hmm.
dryness really sits well with the savory notes that we picked up as well. So it kind of, because even for me, that notion of vanilla ice cream was very subtle. It wasn't, I guess, a defining character of the dram. So I wouldn't say this is a sweet dram, more leaning
Yep.
towards the savory palate. So dry and savory, just good stuff.
Yeah, the kind of peat that you're left with at the finish is, yeah, a medicinal one that kind of sits at the back of your throat. It doesn't feel like it's blown out my palate and I'm just breathing out smoke.
Yeah, yeah. And even for me, the smoke on this one is very at the back, and it's a woody,
Mm-hmm.
oaky smoke. It's not a smoke that envelops your palate, but it's one that gives everything a nice coating. It lets everything else play out in front, and then it just
Yeah,
kind of,
before
yeah,
making itself apparent.
yeah. Then it just kind of embraces everything else, and then just everything else takes the front seat and leads the show.
Yeah, and there is like a slight fruitiness that it's hard to say where I'm picking it up. I feel like it comes across at the end as well, like kind of just like separate from the smoke, but it's almost like a pear.
Okay, interesting. I don't really get too much of a fruity note. I'm more leaning along the spiciness and the savory.
Yeah, but like it's coming across in, I guess, more of like a texture kind of way, as
Okay,
opposed
right.
to like
Yep.
the flavor is still kind of there. Like I'm getting like that flavor of the pear, but it's more like, the kind of, I don't know how to describe the texture of like pear flesh, but it's like when you're eating a pear, that's the feeling I'm getting.
Do you want to add a bit of water or do you want to keep going?
I was going to keep going, but I think, yeah, it's a good point. It is at 40%, so we'll probably only just add a couple of drops.
I mean, even before we get into the addition of water, the dram itself is quite complex, even without that addition of water helping it to open up and breathe a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I 100% agree. And I mean, like, it shows you that even if you're buying a whiskey that's at that base level of 40%, you're not necessarily sacrificing ABV for quality, because Laphroaig can show you can do both. I mean, like, after adding the water, going back onto the nose, like that chili pepper note is standing out a lot more.
Yeah, 100%. Even for me, the iodine note or even that medicinal note, almost from like, I guess, like a first aid box, is almost jumping out a bit more as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because, like, the kind of thing, like, you don't think when you describe that kind of sense, you don't think it's going to be something you'd actually enjoy, but it really is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just really weird notes that you're thinking, oh, what does this remind me of? Oh, it reminds me of a first aid box. Oh, well, that's not gonna taste good. And then you're like, well, wait, it actually does.
Yeah. It's like, do you want to taste a whiskey that smells like a first aid box and a chlorine pool? Try Laphroaig.
And I think what's really interesting as well, like I'm getting a little bit of mocha on the end now,
Is that on the palate or the nose?
on the palate.
Hmm.
It's a bit weird.
Yeah, the
Maybe,
ending's changed.
yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's mocha, or maybe it's just a sweeter note that's being a bit more present now. That's actually revealed itself with the addition of water. Not too sure.
Yeah, I would have maybe said something different, like so that I've lost the pear now. After adding the water, that pear's gone, but it's replaced by almost like a bitterness that, could possibly come down to some kind of coffee grain, but it's more of like not fresh coffee grains, but like coffee grain that's already had like the water run through it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, really interesting with the addition of water. I'd say I'd still prefer it without the water.
I would
But
agree. I think it's a little bit smoother without the water.
yeah,
Like the water's making some of the notes stand out a little bit sharper, like that kind of peppery note is leaving a slight kick
yeah,
or a slight, not necessarily burn, but like that, the kind of peppery burn you get when you have pepper or too much pepper.
yeah, yeah. But the smoothness that I guess characterizes this whiskey is more present without the addition of water.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But then again, that's just something as well. When it comes to our palates, we usually prefer whiskey without water. But as you've seen on the pod, there are some instances where we have been surprised and water
Would always.
has benefited a whiskey. So, hey, to each their own. But Daniel and I both say Laphroaig 10, best without.
But I would say with the addition of water, I'm kind of noticing it as I'm speaking, but like the smokiness of it is starting to feel a bit more present now.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I've got smoke coming from the back of my mouth and through my nose.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Just because prior to that, the smoke, like I mentioned before, was just kind of embracing everything else. Now it's a bit more forward, and
Yeah,
as opposed to embracing everything, it's kind of saying, "Move aside, get out of the way. It's my turn."
coming through.
Yeah, it's almost that now.
All right. Well, this is hard because I can't see how much you've got left, but I'm about to finish my dram. Brad, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm just about to finish as well. So, do you want to get into a dramming words?
Let's do it.
Alrighty. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
Well, okay, I'm gonna go first. And my dreaming words for this is I'm a kid, I'm running around the pool, I've slipped over and scraped my knee, and I'm getting it bandaged. So the lifeguard is opening the first aid box and pulling out a bandage, and they're swabbing it down with iodine and I don't know if iodine, Benadine, whatever they use to clean the wounds. And it's been bandaged up, and I've been given a lollipop because I was such a brave boy.
I was like, what? I thought you were about to end that with, and then I was given a dram of Laphroaig 10. Oh, far out. I was
childhood.
Yeah, I was waiting for that at the end. When you said, I was like, what? I was about to say, what is going on? You just said you were a kid and you've been given a dram of Laphroaig 10. Oh, man. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And what about you?
All right, so my dramming words for Laphroaig 10. I am the Tin Man going down the yellow brick road looking for a heart, and I finally reached the wonderful Wizard of Oz, and instead of a heart, he's given me the Laphroaig 10 to warm me and comfort me. That is my dramming words.
I mean, what better reward at the end of the journey?
Yeah, 100%. The best reward that you could ever get.
You ask for a heart, he gives you the Laphroaig 10. Basically the same thing.
Yeah, basically the same thing. I mean, he could have given me any peated whiskey, but this is what Laphroaig 10 makes me feel.
Yeah, it suits you for that moment. But just while you're speaking, sorry, I was just finishing my dram, but I was having another smell of it, and I'm like, getting honey on the nose too. Oh. Just my final note.
Very nice.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, let's head on to our segment.
Alrighty, we're back. Segment time.
Okay. So, our segment is, I guess, it's going to be a discussion of peat. I mean, like, we kind of couldn't not talk about peat on an episode that features two peated whiskies. And I'm aware we have already discussed, like, what it is and how it's used in whiskey. But I think we'll give a little bit more on the history, as well as how it's used, why it's used, and our favorite things about peat. So,
Yeah.
a lot of this information I got from a website called the World Whiskey Day. So, just referencing my sources. But peat was used in like the whiskey making process primarily because it was just a readily accessible fuel throughout most areas of Scotland. It was primarily used as like a domestic fuel, so like heating up hearths and fireplaces, but it was also used in distillery kilns. So, as we've already mentioned,
You're saying like hearths. I'm like, yes, it does. Peat does warm my heart.
Every time I hear it, I'm like, yes, peat. But yeah, so we've already spoken about how that kind of peat works in the whiskey making process, like how barley is peated. But to quickly recap, when it's burnt in kilns, it releases like an aromatic smoke, which has a significant influence on the barley. So it imbues it with a compound called phenols. And if you've read, I know a couple of whiskeys, particularly Octomore, references like the ppm, which is parts per million. So that's a measure of the phenolic content in the whiskey. And so peated whiskey was basically the norm across most distilleries in Scotland. And I mean, like, what a time to be alive when every distillery was just doing peated whiskey.
I'm telling you, I'm born in the wrong age.
I know, we really were. Yeah. But we still have access to it. So, consolation prize.
Can't complain.
But slowly, distilleries moved away from peat. And this was mainly because peat just really divided consumer opinions. So you'd have some people that loved peated whiskies and some people that would shop on like the more lightly peated range. But, it was also a result of like innovation and access to fuel, primarily access to Coke. And I'm not talking about that Coke, the other Coke. I'm talking about Coke, which is like a hard gray porous fuel that has like a really high carbon content and it has few impurities, which means it burns more evenly and consistently with less smoke than peat. Now, Coke was made really accessible in Scotland with the development of rail and transport. So most engines burnt coal or burnt Coke, and, by building railways throughout Scotland, large supplies of coal and Coke were transported throughout the land, becoming more available. Now, the lowlands and Speyside were the first regions to realize the potential of unpeated whiskey for like a wide consumer market, and a lot of other distilleries soon followed suit. Now, Islay and Orkney, as well as several mainland distilleries, held on to that tradition of peating their whiskies, which, we are extremely grateful for.
Yes, 100%.
But most of these distilleries, but most of these distilleries used varying proportions of peat, which has resulted in like the wide variation of flavor of peat used in whiskies today. And, one of the things is like, it's said that every whiskey drinker eventually makes his, hers, or their way to peated whiskey, which, we completely get.
Yeah.
But, some people ask, like, well, why is this? Like, why do people make their way to peated whiskey? I don't think this is a question we've ever really asked, being peat heads basically from the get-go. Like, we've just found the love of peated whiskey pretty much intuitive, as well as like embedded in what whiskey is.
Yeah, we've almost worked, I guess, backwards. We kind of fell in love with peated whiskey and then we're making our way back to unpeated whiskey now.
Yeah. So we're trying to see like what does unpeated whiskey has to offer? Can we enjoy it as much as we enjoy peated whiskey? We have found it is possible.
Yeah.
But others have speculated on the appeal of peated whiskey. So, and I mean, like, I thought this was super poetic, but the author of Maclean's Miscellany of Whiskey said, Perhaps the Big Islers, the smokiest of all malt whiskies, recollect the whiskies of the past, and perhaps one of the reasons for their current popularity is their authenticity, their heritage, and atavistic folk memory like candles and open fires, Christmas trees, and stormy nights. And I mean,
Oh,
like,
what a dream in
if that doesn't
words.
make you want to try peated whiskey, I don't know what will.
Yeah, 100%. That I mean that is a dream in words.
Yeah, exactly. This guy has nailed that concept. But yeah, so peated whiskey, it's more than just like the addition of a smoky flavor to whiskey. It is still a defining aspect of Scotch whiskey. So I think it transcends, world whiskey. And a lot of people, when they think of Scotch, initially associate some level of peat or some level of smoke to whiskey. Which I guess is what our affinity for Scotch, and why most people see Scotch and whiskey as like basically the same kind of terms.
Yeah. On that, I mean, let's just talk about our favorite peated whiskies now. I mean, this isn't necessarily a particular distillery or bottle, but probably what we like about different variations in peat, as well as which ones are our favorites. So really, what types of peat do we like? And maybe even we'll talk about the idea of maybe even experiencing palate fatigue from remaining within that peated environment for a bit too long, which of course both you and I have experienced, and maybe we can talk about that and dwell on that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like when I think of peated whiskies, I mean, the first thing, like when you initially get into it, a lot of what you're getting is just that overwhelming smoky notes. It can be hard for people starting out to see beyond that, or at least see the differences between different kinds of peated whiskey.
Yeah, and it's even looking beyond what else the smoke has to offer. You know what I mean? And or even if it's worth their time trying to uncover what's behind that smoke.
Yeah, and so I think like that smoke, or at least should more accurately say the peat, takes a couple of different forms. So for me, I usually associate it as like either being like earthy or medicinal. You've got like smoky or like burnt wood and ash. Now I characterize those as two different. Like smoky is like smoke, but then you've got like burnt wood, which is more like the remnants. So you've got more of the sense of the wood that has been burnt as opposed to the smoke that's coming off it. So it's like there was a fire here. There isn't currently a fire, but there was one.
Yeah. So
if you ever...
So I was going to say, so maybe you'd characterize smoky as more along the lines of a campfire.
Yeah, and then the burnt wood ash kind of thing is a campfire the next day. Like when you get up in the morning and you've got kind of like, there was a fire burning the day before.
Yep.
That kind of smell imbues everything. And then you've also got like on the lines of like the savory, meaty, cooked food kind of sense. And lastly, I would probably also say like I get like a very tar and oily kind of what would you call it? Like a mechanic shop or a boat shed, those kind of engine oil, tar, road. So peat can take a variety of forms, and I think just if you enjoy peat, exposure to a variety of distilleries is going to give you a sense of the differences between, or at least the variations with which peat can take. And that can be hard if you're just sticking to like your favorite distillery and you're never really branching beyond that.
Yeah, definitely. And even for myself, like my favorite experiences of peat are generally the notes that present as smoky, coastal, earthy, medicinal, and those savory notes as well. I've also started to enjoy the tarry characteristic and that oily nature. I never used to really love peat for that, but I've started to enjoy it and really, I guess, appreciate it now. And also a note that I guess took me a little while to really appreciate was that vegetal note, where it's almost like decayed vegetation or burnt vegetation. So that note was something that took me a little while to come to terms with in terms of truly appreciating it.
Mhm.
And for me,
And
the whiskey that really turned the dial for me on that would be that Lagavulin 12, the 2019 special release. So
yeah,
that really turned my head onto that and really gave me a core appreciation for it.
yeah, and I think that's just one of the only ways you can start to pick out these differences between the varieties of peated whiskey is by trying different ones. And it is a good way to avoid palate fatigue. Like if you initially got a really good smoky hit from a whiskey and you keep going back to that one and you can't quite capture that, going to another one can almost alleviate that. Or at least it gives you a different perspective or a different way of viewing peat. So when you do return to the initial one that kind of caught your attention, you can get that back. And that's kind of like the differences between how peat can express itself. But, stepping beyond that, which is what we found, is if you take a break from peated whiskies altogether, upon returning, you almost find like a new appreciation for it, or at least you're able to pick out the variety of complexities in the flavors that lie underneath the peat and the smoke.
Yeah. And even for myself, like on my own whiskey journey, there have been periods of time where I know I might need to take a step back from peated whiskey, because typically when you're experiencing a whiskey from Islay or Skye, Orkney, or wherever, if it's a peated whiskey, generally it's a big flavor, a bold flavor, one that pretty much encompasses your entire palate. So
Yeah.
every now and again, you are going to need to take a break from that. And if, for myself particularly, if I often take when I take a step away from peated whiskey, I often go to the lighter characteristics present in a Speyside, or I even take time in the Highlands as well, or have some Aussie whiskey too, because good stuff here as well. So I often like to take a step away every now and again just to almost reset my palate. And in a sense, maybe reset my palate without taking a break from whiskey, because I don't want to take a break from whiskey. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just finding other ways to reset my palate. And while I'm doing that, I'm still training my palate in a different area, a different region, trying to still gain more in that bank of association, so that when I do come back to that peated whiskey, it almost has a more prominent effect than it did when I was just, I guess, enthralled or trapped within that one subcategory of whiskey.
Yeah. And I think like taking a step away, that like you can't force yourself to do it, because I know what it's like to love peated whiskey and just want more peated whiskey. And you're like, maybe I should go away. And then if you try something else, you're just like, this doesn't have peat. I'm not enjoying it as much as I would have. And it's like, so you need to be open to that. You need to be like willing to accept the fact that I'm trying this whiskey. I'm going to find a way to enjoy it without the peat. Like, I'm going to look for reasons why not having peat in this one is a good thing. And for me, I find it's more seasonal, my enjoyment. Like, I'm more open to trying a variety of different expressions in summer.
Right.
When it comes to like the colder weathers in winter, it's like all I want is that smoky whiskey. Like, I want that warm fire feeling inside me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's almost what I experience as well, especially like for us here in Australia. We're heading into winter now, into the colder months. I'm most likely just going to be exclusively drinking peated whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it will make it very hard to step away, but I'll try.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you got like the cask strength sherry ones for.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, reach out to us if you've got any say on peated whiskey, or maybe even your own experiences with peated whiskey. What do you enjoy? with peated whiskey, what are your favorite types? Or, I mean, what are your favorite bottles or favorite expressions of peat? Maybe there's a peated whiskey in a rum cask, for example, or a sherry cask that you really think we should turn our head to and give it a go. So reach
Or
out to
even like a
us.
peated
Yeah.
whiskey from another country.
Oh, yeah. Love to try that stuff too. So reach out to us, dramtalk.au@gmail.com or Dramtalk Podcast on Instagram.
We'd love to hear any whiskey.
Any whiskey, even if it's not peated, just anything. And we would love to hear it. So with that, let's get back into the whiskey. Righty, so second dram of the evening, second dram of the pod. Ardbeg 10.
All right, now for my brief, I guess, bullet points on Ardbegs history. Like every distillery's history is somewhat unique and they all have their little interesting quirks. But I think coming off the back of the diversity and intrigue of Laphroaigs can make any distillery seem a little bit uneventful. But yeah, so most of Ardbeg history, pulled it from the Scotch Whisky website. And like Laphroaig, they were founded in 1815 by the MacDougall family. Alexander MacDougall was, I guess, the big boss, the forerunner. He died in 1853 and actually left the distillery to be run by his sisters, Margaret and Flora. Now, there's a trend here for Islay distilleries to be run by women, and is that correlated to the good product they've put out? I'll leave that for you to decide.
Yeah.
But the reason for its success over the year was due to the growing popularity of blends. So, like a lot of whiskies, I think the entire Scotch whisky market has basically been held up by blended whiskey throughout most of its history. And a lot of blends wanted to have some level of like a smoky element running through them. So Ardbeg was a good choice for them. So they primarily did blends. In 1911, the Ardbeg name and that like iconic Celtic style A were registered as a trademark. And like all distilleries, there were fluctuations in its popularity and production over the years. It was mothballed for the first time in 1981. So basically, it hadn't closed down. They just shut its doors and didn't really do anything. But production was restarted in 1989. This was on an intermittent basis. And when they opened in 1989, when they opened their doors again in 1989, they joined Laphroaig in the Allied Distillers Group. The distillery itself was silenced once more in 1996, but it was saved a year later by Glenmorangie. Now, at this point, Ardbeg had already got like a big reputation as a cult single malt. So Glenmorangie kind of had the challenge of managing current expectations as well as like recreating the entire brand. So they invested in a visitor center and a cafe, which for years was basically the only place to eat out in the south of Islay. And due to its stock profile, the first age statement that was released under Glenmorangie was the 17-year-old. And that's when they like restarted production. And it wouldn't have been until about 2008 when the 10-year-old would finally be like ready to hit the market, considering they had to age it for 10 years. Although they did have incremental releases to kind of show their work in progress from about 2004. So they called these the very young, the still young, and the almost there. I think judging from the current release of the Wee Beastie, it might be as close as you can get to experiencing one of these younger Ardbeg expressions without paying an extreme amount of money, because some of Ardbeg's non-age statement releases have been like, I guess, created exclusively from their now very rare old stock. But that doesn't mean all of the non-age statements are, because there are some that are either from a new batch or just from a mix of them. And I guess like the most recent point in Ardbeg history was in 2018 when they unveiled plans to double Ardbeg's production capacity with the addition of another pair of stills to be housed alongside the existing two in a new still house. And I think that's like, aside from the kind of quite regular and interesting releases, that's pretty much Ardbeg's history to date. And I think that leads us to the dram of the 10.
Oh, good. A lot briefer than mine. So I was glad for that.
Oh yeah, so was I.
Alrighty.
No offense, like Laphroaig's history was really interesting.
Yeah. And my voice is lovely. So let's get into the nose of the Ardbeg 10.
I mean, like the first thing I noticed on this one is it's a lot more salty and it's a lot more savory. You're not getting so much of like that kind of wet seaside medicinal notes.
No, not at all. This one for me is significantly more peat forward on the nose. But as you mentioned before, I get that real strong sense of, I guess, a coastal feel, which is a significantly more present in this than it was in the Laphroaig.
Yeah, and there's like a very like salt and lemony kind of scent to it, which does give you that kind of coastal sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Whereas I wasn't really getting any of those fruity notes that you mentioned in the Laphroaig. This here though, you can really see a real citrusy characteristic there on the nose.
Yeah.
Almost like a lemony lime. It's really good stuff. I even get like a little, really weird, but for me, like a small, I guess, indication of golden syrup. I don't know.
Okay, interesting. I'm not picking that out because I'm getting more of that kind of sharp citrusy note, as well as a spice there that's probably along the lines of like a cardamom.
Yeah.
Or a clove.
Yeah. To be fair, the citrus note is quite striking in Ardbeg.
Yeah.
But what I like about that citrus note though, it gives it a very clean, almost refreshing feel.
Yeah, it does.
Alrighty, let's go onto the palate.
I think we should. I mean, it's one of those ones where it's satisfying that what you're getting on the nose meshes so well with what comes across on the palate.
Yeah.
Because you've gotten that like really lemony lime kind of sense to it. But there's like a really sweet, not a really sweet, but there is like a smooth, sweet vanilla that underlines it. So it just cut through the sharpness of that to give you a very balanced experience. And then you just got like that smoky peat that rises up at the back.
Yeah. If you know Ardbeg, the smoke that they produce in their whiskey is just almost just one of my favorite expressions of peat.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's just, oh man, it really just engrosses your palate and it's almost all consuming. It just kind of fills your mouth and that's almost all you get. But at the same time, it somehow leaves room for other flavors to be present, which just in my mind doesn't seem to, like, does not compute because of how filling and how full it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's weird. Because like, yeah, even as you were talking, I felt that smoke parting. And then what I was left with was, again, that combination of that kind of sweet and citrusy note. And I was getting like a lemon meringue.
Yeah.
Or a lemon tart. That's probably like a lemon custard.
Yeah. And with the finish here, whereas I said the Laphroaig was a nice big finish, for me, the Ardbeg's finish is long as opposed to being big or grandiose. It's just a long finish. But it's a long finish that's really characterized by almost the saltiness of the sea air, as well as some underlying sweetness, but then you still get those faint characteristics of maybe a dying bonfire on the beach. Just oh man, just the finish is so good on this.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it is. And I think we should note that this does come in at 46%. So it is quite a big jump up from the Laphroaig, but it both makes me surprised at the complexity of the Laphroaig, like surprised and impressed. I'm like, yeah, Laphroaig did a really good job at 40%. But then, yeah, it does show you that, like, well, being at 46%, obviously Ardbeg would be non-chill filtered, which they do state on the bottle. Looking at it, you'd say natural color as well. So, an all-round solid expression.
Yeah, 100%. So, do you want to get into some water now?
Yeah, I think we should. I can add a little bit more in this time, but I'll probably only still add a couple of drops. Enough to see how much it changes, but I've been quite happy with my experience of it so far.
Yeah, I've been pretty content. Not looking to the addition of water, but we must for the pod.
For the pod. So, like, I'm getting, like, similar to the Laphroaig with the addition of water, like the sharpness of the salt, and there's almost like a peppery note that's coming across here as well.
Yeah, interesting. For me, I'd say it's almost like if you put salt onto a lemon. That's almost what I'm getting on the nose. Yep. It's like a salted lemon.
Yeah, like following a tequila shot.
Yeah, but the spirit that you consumed prior is significantly more superior.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like what I am enjoying about this is it does feel very clean, the smell. So it's like that kind of fresh, crisp sea air.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you are on a diet, this may be the whiskey for you.
It'll feel like fresh and crisp, but it's also very full.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really enjoying the nose with the addition of water. It's really opened up the citrus characteristic, but at the same time, really amplified the saltiness. Now, I guess the scent of peat that I picked up prior to the addition of water has really subsided, but what's remained is still quite enjoyable.
Yeah, and like another thing, and I think this comes with the ABV as well, but even the legs on the glass with this, they are still very thick, very slow, and they remain there for so long, and you're like, that is good quality stuff.
Yeah, so when you're looking at it, you're like, this is a substantial whiskey.
Yeah. All right, let's get onto the palate again. Saying getting a lot of the similar notes. If anything, the other addition to it that is more of another element as opposed to a defining characteristic is more like a lemon sherbet coming across too.
Yeah, I think for my, I guess, palate that I'm getting with the addition of water, I'm getting a bit more presence of pepper, and it's a bit more fiery, a little more lively. I'm also getting some grassy notes presenting themselves. But what I'm really enjoying, though, is that slight hint of pepper jumping up, and just the fact that it's almost hopped out of the seat and I guess just sprung to life a little bit. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, like I'm picking that up on the nose. I'm not so much getting it on the palate, but yeah, like what you're saying, like it's striking on the nose like very strongly to the sense of like it's very reminiscent of Talisker, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, in that sense where when you add that water to Talisker, it almost strikes out at you. Yeah. Just strikes out at you and gives you a little bit more pep, a little more zest. That's almost what you're getting here as well.
Yeah.
And again, just like the Laphroaig, so much complexity to enjoy in the Ardbeg. I don't know about you, but I am done.
I'm almost done. After the water, like before when I mentioned like the smoke parted and I was getting like a lemon tart or a lemon custard. Now I'm getting salted caramel, which I found is a very weird twist, but not a very weird twist, but like I wasn't expecting the finish to change from that kind of lemony, citrusy tart to something sweet like a caramel, but it has, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, for me, the finish with the water is more of a dry smoke, and it's still very lengthy. So I really enjoy that the finish hasn't lost its length. So for me, that's quite impressive.
All right. Since you finished, do you want to go on with your dram in words?
Yeah, sure. So my dreaming words for the Ardbeg 10. This for me is a bonfire by the seaside. I've got my cast iron pan, and this is bacon and eggs on the seaside, sitting there with a campfire. You're still getting that waft of smoke, but then you've got one of the best breakfasts you could ever have: bacon and eggs.
Ah, yeah. Take me there now, Brad. That sounds really good. Yeah, my dreaming words, I would say pretty similar. It is like a beachside party. So, but like a kind of relaxed one, you go down there with your friends, you make a bonfire on the beach. It's late in the night, music playing, having some drinks around the fire. You got the sound of the ocean in the background, just all around good time.
Nah, that's good too. That's good too. Alrighty, so I think it's time for the ratings. Laphroaig 10. Daniel, what do you got?
Oh, okay. I think I'm going to give the Laphroaig 10 a 7.6.
7.6. Whoa.
What, do you think that's too low?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a bit low. I think that's a bit harsh. I think you'd be hard done by there.
I mean, like, I've put it in the range with Wee Beastie, Open 14. I know you'd love that. But like, I've got Tobermory 12 at 7.8. I've got Bunnahabhain 12 at 7.8. Like, these are ones that I think I enjoy. Oh, yeah.
I was about to say, I was like, I challenge you to a duel. I was about to slap you with a glove.
Okay, I'm gonna have to give it a 7. I'm gonna have to put it in the range with those. So I'm giving it a 7.8.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, like, you know how much I love Bunnahabhain 12 and Tobermory.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
fair.
this is on par with them. Like, if those three were sitting on my shelf, I would say flip a coin, but I've got 3 bottles and the coin only has 2 sides. So roll the dice to decide which one, because I just would be torn between them.
Yep. So for me, Laphroaig 10 is 8.3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's an 8.3. It's bloody good. I love it. And having that dram of it today, it almost pained me that I hadn't had a dram of it for that long. It almost just gave me a bit.
Agree with that.
Yeah, it gave me that. Oh, Brad, you've been missing out. But at the same time, I felt good. I felt good having that dram.
Yeah.
I felt real good having that dram. So it was like we mentioned before in our segment, it was one of those, I stepped away and now I have an even greater appreciation for Laphroaig.
Yeah.
Right. So that leaves the Ardbeg 10.
What about
Right. So for me, the Ardbeg 10 is going to sit at a 8.5.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I just enjoy the Ardbeg 10 a little bit more than the Laphroaig 10. And I definitely do enjoy the 10 more than the Wee Beastie. So that's kind of my thinking there going into it. And just looking at where I've rated whiskies and where they're at. Ardbeg 10, Lagavulin 16. For me, they're kind of on par, to be honest. I could almost go either way when I'm looking for an island whiskey,
Yeah, I get that. And I'm like, I will point out as well, because I find it funny, is like, I know we've re-reviewed the Wee Beastie, but we haven't re-reviewed Black. But like, you've rated Black 7.5 and you've rated Wee Beastie an 8.
Black was at a very challenging time in my life.
It was early on in the process. We all make mistakes.
It was at a very challenging time in my life. I was still finding my feet in the whole podcasting world. So
young and naive.
Yeah, I was young, naive, My hair was still flowing, so it was a challenging time. It was a different time. So looking back on it now, of course, the Ardbeg Black will be looked at again, as will some other whiskies that we have reviewed, as we have reviewed over 40 different drams. Can you believe it? But Daniel, Ardbeg 10, where are you at?
I'm going to have to give it an 8.2.
Ooh, 8.2. I mean, I'm glad that you actually recognize the greatness that we had today and put something in the eights. So I'm happy for that.
I mean, like, it's hard to say because it is really hard to consider where we place them, because I know we have said we don't necessarily compare one whiskey directly with another, but it's just, I guess it's more like for our learning curve with like, how do we actually view these whiskies when it comes to, I guess this is what we put in here is a mix of the quality of the whiskey as well as our experience with it.
Yes.
So, it doesn't necessarily mean because we've rated one higher than another, we think it's a better whiskey. We maybe just enjoyed it that much at that particular point in time. And the other one, we didn't enjoy as much at a particular point in time, or we did enjoy it, but, for whatever reason, it just felt more appropriate to keep it within a certain range. So I think that's kind of where we have to put a caveat. And we have mentioned it, like our ratings table is a fluid thing. We will be changing the ratings. We will hopefully get this live somewhere so you can see what we have previously rated, as opposed to going back through our podcast episodes to find out.
Yep, that is the plan. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. But yeah, so I think I rated the Laphroaig 10, the 7.8, just because with a lot of those others, I noticed I also rated the Talisker Storm as 7.8. So it just fits within that range of all of these whiskies that I would love to have on my shelf all the time. And they're basically the kind of daily drinker ones. Like if I felt like a whiskey, these are one of the ones I would be reaching for to have a dram of.
Yeah.
And then that Ardbeg 10 falls into that, one that's just hits a little different. And you're like, yeah, that's kind of a step above.
Yeah, that's fair. And as you can see by our ratings today, that we did kind of both fall in line with the Ardbeg being just that little bit better than the Laphroaig 10. And that might just be our palates. So when it comes to peated whiskey, I find that Daniel and I tend to have a pretty similar palate. Of course, we differ when it comes to branching out from that, where I do prefer a sweeter dram and Daniel prefers a more savory dram. But in this instance, since our palates do similarly align when it comes to peated whiskey, we've both kind of come to the conclusion that Ardbeg is just that little bit better than the Laphroaig 10. And both being 10-year-olds, you can almost draw a direct comparison, but in that same instance, we know that Laphroaig 10 is very unique in the profile that they do deliver. So, hey, I mean, look, I guess the best way to put it would be, if you're looking for a more medicinal dram, lean towards Laphroaig. If you're looking for something a bit more coastal, Ardbeg 10.
That's a pretty fair assumption. And I think that would just about wrap it up for today.
Yes, it would.
So hopefully the recording comes out all right. It has been our first time trying to record interstate, working on hotel crappy Wi-Fi. So hopefully there hasn't been too much lag. And future episodes will probably be on a more stable internet connection.
Yes, that is the hope. But as always, thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. That's all we have time for today. So it would be a huge help if you could give us a rating.
Preferably 5 stars.
So wherever you get your podcasts, it's a huge help to us. And if you'd like to get into contact, you can reach us at Dram Talk Podcast on Instagram, or email us at dramtalk.au@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Now, our glasses may be empty, but we hope yours aren't. So, pour another dram!